Hello, I am so glad that you have chosen to join us today for this webinar that will address the high-quality pre-kindergarten component of student progress monitoring. My name is Tamala Olsby, and I am a part of the Early Childhood Education Division here at the Texas Education Agency. This slide shows us what we will discuss today within this webinar. We will first discuss an overview of all of the high-quality pre-kindergarten components that are referenced in HB3, and then we will spend the majority of our time on student progress monitoring. We'll look at some research. We'll figure out what is required within statute or commissioner's rule, and then we will look at some frequently asked questions. And then we're going to go a step even further and look at how could we even have higher quality than what is required in statute. And to end our time together, we will look at some resources and some support that you may need. So let's briefly start by looking at the high quality components that are referenced in HB3. You know, Texas has been on a journey to increase the quality of its public pre-kindergarten programs for quite some time. The link between positive child outcomes and the level of quality within the pre-kindergarten program is a well-researched topic. Let's look at this piece of research that said, not all pre-K programs successfully support early learning. It is decidedly not the case that just any pre-K program operating under just any circumstances will provide young children with the inputs they need to produce, let alone sustain early development gains. So that's what we are aiming for. High quality that will lead to early developmental gains. We want our youngest students in Texas to attend a high quality pre-kindergarten program. These are the high quality pre-kindergarten components that are referenced in HB3 and are a requirement for every public pre-kindergarten program within Texas serving eligible 4-year-old students. The focus of this particular webinar is going to be on student progress monitoring. And all of the information within this webinar can be found in at least one of the 3 resources that are listed here on the slide. It'll either be in statute, in commissioner's rule, or it will be part of HB3. So here we go. What are the requirements that focus on pre-kindergarten student progress monitoring? Before we dive in, I believe we should ask the question, why are we looking at student progress monitoring as a component of high quality? Well, let's look at this piece of research. The most meaningful of assessments provide information the teacher can use to better understand her students and then support them in taking the next steps in their learning. Assessment should inform instruction. Assessments are linked, just like instruction is, to positive child outcomes. For the purposes of this webinar, the term student progress monitoring and the term student assessment are going to be used interchangeably, and they have the same meaning. This slide articulates what is in statute requiring student progress monitoring for pre-kindergarten programs serving 4-year-old students. So let's read what is in statute. In 29.167, it says, a school district shall select and implement a curriculum for pre-kindergarten program that measures the progress of students in meeting the recommended learning outcomes. So there you go. Now let's look at 29.169, which says a school district shall select and implement appropriate methods for evaluating the district's program classes by measuring student progress. A school district may administer diagnostic assessments to students in a program class to evaluate student progress as required by subsection A, but may not administer a state standardized assessment instrument. And lastly, an assessment instrument administered to a pre-kindergarten program class must be selected from a list of appropriate pre-kindergarten assessment instruments identified by the commissioner. This slide shows us what is in Commissioner's Rule regarding student progress monitoring for pre-kindergarten programs that are serving eligible 4-year-old students. So let's look at this reference. It's 102.1003D. A school district or an open enrollment charter school shall measure the progress of each student in meeting the recommended end of pre-kindergarten year outcomes identified in the Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines that were updated in 2015, using a student progress monitoring tool that is included on the commissioner's list of approved pre-kindergarten instruments, and it must measure health and wellness, language and communication, emergent literacy reading, emergent literacy writing, and mathematics. So what does all of that mean? Well, briefly, what it means is the following items are mandated. Student progress monitoring for all 4-year-old eligible students is mandated. It is also mandated that districts use a tool from the commissioner's list of approved pre-kindergarten assessment instruments for their eligible 4-year-old students. And it is also mandated that those 4-year-old students should be assessed in each of the following developmental domains: health and wellness, language and communication, emergent literacy reading, emergent literacy writing, and mathematics. That is a lot. So let's delve a little bit deeper. This slide shows the current commissioner's list of approved pre-kindergarten assessment instruments. This list goes through the 2020-2021 school year. And so I want to go over all of the columns here on this slide. So if we start at the left, you'll see that the commissioner's list lists all of the student progress monitoring tools that are approved, and they are on the left-hand side. The next column shows the publisher. The next column shows the cost of those tools. The next shows the format of those tools, whether they are web-based or must be done with paper and pencil. Then it shows whether they are observational assessments or direct assessments, and some of them are both. And then the next column shows how easily one can learn to use them. Then the next two columns shows what languages they are available in, and English and Spanish are chosen. And then the last 5 columns show those 5 developmental domains: ELR, or early literacy reading, ELW, early literacy writing, L&C, language and communication, H&W, health and wellness, or math is mathematics. In the past, LEAs were allowed to use an assessment tool with eligible 4-year-old students that was not on the commissioner's list, as long as they submitted an alternative assessment form to the Texas Education Agency. That now can only be done with eligible 3-year-old students. Be watching for the release of a to the administrator addressed correspondence in September 2019, very soon, that will explain this in a little more detail. Let's look at some frequently asked questions now. What if a child in our pre-kindergarten program will not participate in the formal assessments that are part of the student progress monitoring tool we are using? That sometimes happens with younger students. So the answer is, it is recommended that the pre-kindergarten children be given adequate time to adjust to the new experience of going to school. For some students, that adjustment time takes a little bit longer. It is allowable to schedule those formal assessments at a time where it appears the child will be more willing to participate. Young children may also hesitate being in a pull-aside activity when their interests are focused on something else that's going on in the classroom. So it might be necessary to change the time of the day when the formal assessment is attempted. And remember, the focus is always on how can we collect authentic, accurate data and help the child feel comfortable in the assessment process. Here's another question. How often should student progress monitoring be done? Well, formal assessment should be done 3 times a year. The beginning of the year and the end of the year data will need to be uploaded into the Early Childhood Data System, or the ECDS as we love to call it, at the end of the year. It also shows the progress that the children make. It shows the progress that the children make during that grade level. The MOI data should be used to inform classroom instruction and to make any course corrections by the teacher. It should be noted here that effective pre-kindergarten teachers are always in the process of informally assessing their students' skills and abilities to understand concepts and using that information to adjust their curriculum and their instruction. Here's another one. Should student progress monitoring be done with children that have an identified disability? Well, the answer is the instructions and guidance on the child's individual education plan, or IEP, should always be followed. An IEP may include instructions regarding whether it is appropriate to use the student progress monitoring tool with the child or not. At times, a teacher may be instructed to conduct part of the student progress monitoring tool with a student with a disability. For example, a student with a mobility difficulty could be assessed, perhaps in all other measures, except those that require movement. So written instructions regarding appropriate accommodations and whether even student progress monitoring should be done should be included on the child's individual education plan. And another one. We've got lots of questions. Is it necessary for teachers to conduct student progress monitoring using more than one tool if the pre-kindergarten program is funded by more than one source? So funding sources often have differences in their guidelines regarding student progress monitoring. So it is recommended that an LEA review the requirements of each funding source and then choose an assessment tool that meets all the specifications of each. As an example, if the pre-kindergarten program received FSP funding plus an early education allotment from the state of Texas, along with Head Start funding from the federal government, those two entities could choose to use a tool that it meets the requirements of both Texas and the federal government. There are many best practices in assessment, and a lot of them are not dealt with in statute. So we want to discuss those in a little more detail right now. And this is taking student progress monitoring to an even higher level of quality. It is always good that we are remembering our goal. What's our bullseye? We want positive child outcomes. And implementing and then using student progress monitoring data will lead to those positive child outcomes that we are all shooting for. In assessment, there are two broad types of assessment. We will call them formal or summative and informal or formative, and they are both very different. In formal assessment, usually the child is constrained. They're taken aside. They perform tasks that have a predetermined correct answer. They might even be pulled out of class for that assessment activity. And then the data is used to compare that particular student to students with similar attributes. In informal assessment, children are not constrained. Usually their behavior is being observed by the teacher and then recorded during their regular classroom activities. So the assessment, the informal assessment activities, are done within the school day, within school activities. And that data provides evidence of what the child has learned and what level of development they are at. Why is it best to use both types of assessment? Well, the best instruction requires constant interaction between assessment, usually informal, and instruction. The formal side of assessment is used in a broader sense to look at overall student progress within one grade level. I'm going to illustrate this in another way. Let's look at this graphic. It is only when assessment data is reviewed on a regular basis that it can be used what it's intended for, which is classroom instruction. So you will notice here that student progress monitoring is done at the beginning of the school year. Then teachers are teaching at the same time. And then informally, the teacher will do more student progress monitoring, and that may adjust or modify her classroom instruction. And that arrow, see those three dots, goes on and on and on. There is interaction between assessment and instruction. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say approximately half of the year has passed. So you're in the middle of the school year, and a teacher still has a student in class, a 4-year-old, that is having difficulty writing any of the letters in his name. That might have been learned through student progress monitoring. One might jump to the conclusion, oh, this child needs more instruction in alphabet recognition. That's why he doesn't know the letters of his name. So therefore, more instruction would occur on the alphabet. But what if later student progress monitoring showed he was learning the letters of the alphabet, but he was still not able to write his name? What if there was another reason why the child was having difficulty? After more informal assessment, the child might it might be learned that actually what is in need of further modification in instruction is an emphasis on his fine motor skills. So assessment, when done well, takes out the guessing. It enables a teacher to use the data that they collect and inform their next steps with each individual student. Classroom instruction then becomes much more intentional. So let's look at some of the possible ways that instruction could be adjusted depending on what is found out about the students through the student progress monitoring. So let me give you some examples. Perhaps the task could be made simpler, or it could be broken down into simpler parts. The teacher might want to alter the amount of time that is spent on a skill. The kids didn't get it the first time, so we're going to have to continue to go over that skill or concept longer. Or through student progress monitoring, they may find out the kids already know that, so we don't need to hardly spend any time on that. It is good adjustment also sometimes to expose a new concept or skill multiple times over a variety of contexts. That is a perfect use for the learning centers within a pre-kindergarten classroom. A concept or skill can be done in 7 different ways by learning it through the learning centers. A teacher might also want to increase the opportunity to practice those skills or mix some easy tasks with a little more difficult tasks. This list of how to adjust instruction is actually endless, and really good teachers do this really, really well. It is also best practice to use input gathered from student families. As you know, it is difficult to collect assessment data from young students, and at times the teacher may wonder if the data is even accurate. That is when a family member might be able to assist. Remember, no one knows that child better than their own family. So let's discuss a few ways an LEA could aim for even higher quality in regards to assessment. Are the tools used for student assessment both linguistically and culturally appropriate? That's an important thing to look at. So when you're choosing a tool off of the commissioner's list that assess the 5 developmental domains, don't forget to look at the students that you are serving and make sure that the tool looks like it will match the students. How does the LEA support pre-kindergarten teachers in completing student progress monitoring within the allotted time frame? Well, we all know that assessment takes a lot of time, and LEAs can make sure that perhaps the paraprofessional in the pre-K classroom is also trained in the assessment tool so that they can assist the teacher. It is a great time for an LEA to offer a substitute to assist a teacher in completing the assessments in the allotted time frame. And LEAs could also support teachers by helping them plan for the assessments during especially the first several weeks of school. How are the results of student assessment communicated to families? Most of the time, I think we would say through some kind of a formal conference. But let's remember that those conferences also have levels of quality. How could the way an LEA is communicating the assessment data be improved? Could perhaps an LEA provide resources for the families to help them to assist their own child in areas of need. And lastly, is the assessment data used to make referrals for students who may need intervention services? LEA should have a process in place to make referrals for students that teachers feel might need either further evaluation or some intervention services. And teachers need to be trained in that process of making referrals. These are all ways that an LEA can not only check off the box, yes, we do student progress monitoring, yes, we do it 3 times a year, yes, we use a tool off the commissioner's list, yes, we evaluate all 5 developmental domains, but look at all the areas on this slide that an LEA could go to an even higher level of quality. And let's not forget those little 3-year-olds. The high quality components referenced in HB3 are directed at 4-year-old eligible students. But it is best practice that pre-kindergarten programs serving eligible 3-year-old students also adhere to the high quality components referenced in statute and commissioner's rule. And don't forget, your district's early education allotment can be spent on serving eligible 3-year-old students. Let's look now at some resources and support that may assist you in complying with this high quality component. Listed here, we've given you the link to the Commissioner's list of approved pre-kindergarten assessment instruments. We've given you links to not only the Children's Learning Institute, but the Education Service Center. They are that widely recognized for their work in student assessment, and they have many, many resources that are on their websites. And lastly, we've given you the link to the Early Childhood Program self-assessments. That is a program self-assessment, and it is a way that a district could assess itself in terms of quality for its pre-K program. And one of the sections in this document is on assessment. We have also created this high quality checklist for you, and it can be used to document areas of strength or proficiency and opportunities to grow, or as we call it here, proficiency in progress in the area of student progress monitoring. The items listed here on this checklist are both in statute and in Commissioner's rule, and they will encourage you to even higher levels of quality. And finally, for support, don't forget that the Early Childhood Education Division here at the Texas Education Agency is ready, and we are willing to help support you in your efforts to make your program of the highest quality. So don't hesitate to visit our website and to email us questions that you may have. I'd like to leave you with a quote. Errors using inadequate data are much less than those using no data at all. Let's make the instruction offered to our youngest students in Texas the best. How do we do that? By using student progress monitoring data appropriately. Thank you for joining us today, and we are hopeful that the information contained on this webinar is useful to you in creating environments for children that are of the highest quality. Thank you.